This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours?
Hello again, everybody. It's your old pal Guardian Enzo coming to you, as always, from the ancient capital of Kyoto, Japan. And joining me this fine afternoon, his time, is our friend Samu from merry old England in London. How are you doing, Samu?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to talking about the series we're going to cover today and hopefully getting more people on board.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one for us. Most of the series we've talked about up to now, in fact, I think all of the series we've talked about up to now have been finished series. We're going to talk about one that's ongoing, and not only ongoing, but has only been around since 2023. So it's a pretty new series, actually. And this series is called The Days of Diamond, Diamond no Kouzai, and it is by Ohashi Hirai. This is Ohashi san's first series, and it's published in Shukan Young Jump and now available in English on the MangaPlus app. That happened pretty recently. I want to say maybe a month ago, something like that. Um, and it was interesting because I noticed this series starting to get a lot of attention at bookshops. One of the things that I know, how I pick up on series that are starting to bubble up is I go to a lot of bookstores and I just look at the manga section, and you start to see series get face outs, full shelves, posters. And I was like, baseball series, that's up my alley. I've never heard of this. And really, it had no translations, no scanlations. If you were wanting to read it in English, there was really no way to do it until it got picked up by Manga Plus about a month ago, and they dumped about the first 40, 45, 50 chapters in English. And this is a series that's hitting big. It's the most recent volume, which I think was volume 5. It actually charted on the Oricon charts for the first time, which is pretty damn cool for a new baseball series. It is getting a lot of attention. It got nominated for the Manga Taisho Award, and it's really a series I think is in Japan going to hit pretty big because it's already starting to hit pretty big. Whether it will hit big overseas is another question, but that's one of the questions I want to discuss. So we're going to talk about an ongoing series, and so there's no finality to it at this point. We're talking about a series that most of you probably haven't read, and a lot of you, I'm going to guess, probably haven't even heard of before we touch on it. So if we can convince a few of you to read it, I think that would be pretty cool. Basically, Days of Diamond is a series about a fifth grader named Jiro Ayasegawa, and Jiro is he's in many ways a very unusual kid. In fifth grade, so he's probably 11 when the series starts, I guess. So in the first place, he's very tall for his age. But he's also very athletically gifted, and preternaturally tall kids often are clumsy and awkward. But no, he's extremely gifted to the point where he's great at pretty much any sport he picks up. So he many sports, swimming, cycling, tennis, you name it, he plays the sport. He's great at it to the point where no one in his age group can keep up with him. And some kids even give up the sport because of how intimidating and how overpowering he is. The problem is Jiro is very kind and very empathetic, and he hates the idea of being great at sports. He just wants to play sports and have fun which for a kid his age is totally appropriate. And he finally finds a local team, the Bambies, which is a kind of a classic, local Bad News Bears baseball team. That's little league team. That's nothing special. And he thinks he's finally found his out. He's finally found a team where he can just have fun and relax, and because nobody cares, how good he is. Nobody can catch his pitches, so he can't really pitch. And then he ends up getting discovered, and things go from there. So we're gonna the line between spoilery and non-spoilery in an ongoing series is a little fuzzier, but we will go with a non-spoiler section to start with. But as I like to do, before we begin the non-spoiler section, I'm going to ask you, Samu, if you have any initial thoughts you want to cover about Days of Diamond before we jump into that.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect from the series going in. For all the months leading up to it, it kind of felt like Enzo was the reporter on the ground who kept sending me messages and updates of how it's being perceived and what's going on in Japan. Because we were just kind of any Western audiences were just left out on what we could experience from the series, and I was because of all of what you had sent over to me leading up to that, I was really curious to see what sort of series it would be, and I was quite surprised when I found out it was essentially like suffering from success, prodigy, and a prodigy who doesn't really want to be a prodigy and tackles it in quite a refreshing way that yeah, I didn't have that as what I thought the series was going to be either. And as well, I think because Ayasegawa, he is like you say, he's very tall for his age. I also didn't realize how young all the characters were, so that was quite shocking as well. Um, yeah, going in, I had no expectations, and I was pleasantly surprised by the direction that it takes with a lot of the decisions it makes. I think it makes sense. It's Weekly Shonen Jump, it is or Weekly Young Jump. It's Weekly Young Jump, so it's very mature, even though it's about children. And there are a lot of things I really like about it. Across its cast of like children and adults, and how it is handling this scenario of a gifted player, or as we're meant to believe, quote unquote, the best in the world.
Yeah, and I think it the way it depicts this is, first of all, a seinen sports series about little kids is very rare. It's a very unusual combination. I can't think of another one off the top of my head, actually. Okay, so let's talk about some of the general things. First of all, um, I think the way it depicts people who don't know, I have spent some time teaching English in Japanese schools. So I have some experience with Japanese boys around the age of the characters that are featuring in the series. And I think it's incredibly authentic in the way it presents the interactions with these kids, because I see these kind of interactions happening, and it really feels very genuine, and it feels it these are not highly stylized, or it's not a theatrical or comedic. These are just kids being kids. And one of the things that I would say, it doesn't come as any kind of revelation, is that kids this age, especially the boys, are basically, they're mostly just goofs. I mean, they're airheads. They're they blunder around. They give each other a hard time. But they're most kids are good kids, and that's kind of the way it is with this series. The main character is exceptional in his talent, but the kids are just, they're real kids, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about the series. Um, so I want to talk some, just kind of will do a little before we get into too much specifics with Days of Diamond. I want to get into talk about sports manga a little bit. Um, First of all, let me ask you this question, because there's no question in Japan this is a breakout hit. It is. It's not future. It's not will be. It is a breakout hit in Japan. It's doing really well. It will get an anime at some point, and it has a chance to be one of the more popular sports manga to come along in quite some time. Why do you think it broke out? Why do you think that now that you've read up to pretty much up to date, as far as I know, where it is? Why do you think Days of Diamond has become a breakout hit in Japan?
Maybe it does have to do with the fact that it is quite unique in it being a seinen story about children that is handled uh, quite maturely, and there is that sense of uh, maybe reflection a reader can have on it, on seeing characters so young handle this situation. And yeah, maybe that is what is resonating with people. I know for a fact that's definitely an element that stands out to me as I was reading it. Yeah, maybe there's like a untapped, um, like different angle that a lot of sports series could take. That could be the reason why.
Interesting. I just, I mean, in listening to you, I'm going to toss it modesty out the window here and have what I think is a pretty brilliant insight. Uh, I'm listening. What you were saying inspired it. I think the key here, or one of the keys, is it's a series about kids that has the freedom of not having to be written for kids. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, yep.
And you talked about reflection, and I think it has a chance to be kind of authentic and nuanced and and almost dispassionate in a way it couldn't be if the people it was trying to win over were the same age as the characters on the page.
Yeah, I feel like that nails it. Yeah, I actually agree, 100%.
Okay, now let me piggyback that question. So, why do we think it became a breakout hit in Japan? Why do you think that it's so hard for sports manga and sports anime to become breakout hits in English when they become big hits? Battle shonens, fantasy, science fiction, mecha series, rom coms, they all can become big hits in English pretty easily. But we see tons of sports manga do huge business in Japan, to become big cultural icons with almost no penetration in the English language market. Just broadly speaking, you don't have to get too specific, but off the top of your head, why do you think that is?
It is always quite interesting to compare what becomes popular in Japan versus what doesn't really resonate overseas. I do wonder if it is partially, I'm just kind of spitballing here. A lot of sports series that do become big everywhere, like in Japan, but also everywhere, they maybe appeal to that sensibility of like battle manga action. It's almost like that sort of story in a sports setting. I think those sorts of series have an easier path to success, especially in the West. Whereas I feel like maybe in Japan there is more. I don't know. Maybe there is just more an interest in manga readers to read narratives about sports that doesn't fall into that specific type of sports series. I feel like it's almost you almost have to kind of convince people to read a sports manga or even watch a sports anime, even if it's something that's popular. You know, like something like Haikyuu or Blue Lock, for example, are two very big examples. They are ones that are popular because the reason I think they're both popular, even though they're quite different, and in my opinion, different degrees of quality to the output, is
Yes.
I think the characters also sell it. I feel like I would speak from perspective of being a complete lover of Haikyuu. I love all the characters, and that is a series where I could have 5-10 chapters focused on any one character, or like take any five random characters, throw them together, and create a scene, and like I'm on board. I'm going to imagine that Blue Lock fans maybe have a similar experience with that. Maybe something similar to Kuroko no Basket. But when it comes to these sorts of like introspective sports series that are essentially like character dramas, then it does become a hard sell to get a wider audience, especially from people overseas or Western
Yeah, I
audiences.
mean, I think Blue Lock especially, that is a battle shonen that happens to be set in sports. I mean, I think that's why that one is an easier sell. To me, that's not complicated. Um, I characterize, I think two broad categories of sports manga are sports manga for people who love sports and sports manga for people who hate sports. And stuff like Blue Lock, Birdie Wing, I think these are sports series. Birdie Wing started out as an anime, but these are series for people who are not really necessarily sports fans. And I think for a long time, I used to think one of the reasons why sports manga and anime had a tougher time in the West is because the people who tended to like manga and anime in the West were not people who tended to be as into sports. Maybe that was too much of a generalization, and I don't think it's as true as it used to be now that anime and manga have become so much more, you know, demographically have become so much more widespread in the West. But I think for a long time, you had a case where everyone of a certain age in Japan was into manga and most were into anime. And in America and in Canada and in the UK and in Australia, it tended to be a certain subset of people. And that necessarily wasn't the same subset of people who were into sports. I have always felt that there was an element of that, but probably that's a lot less true now than it used to be. All right, so another big question I think this series asks is if we can operate at a genius level in a given field, does that mean we must? In other words, if we can be great at something, do we have an obligation to be great at it? Do we have an obligation to do that? And I really feel like that's one of the big questions that Days of Diamond is asking. Is do we have a certain kind of responsibility to say, if you're a religious person, to say God given or otherwise, hey, we've been blessed with this talent. Do we have a responsibility to utilize it, to exploit it to its fullest? What's your take on that? Do you think we do?
Oh, that's a big question. But yeah, I do think the series kind of presents that, and I almost feel like it's going to spend its entire runtime going back and forth and like exploring that sort of question, what should come from it. I think if you're talking about the talented person and like as an individual from their perspective, it's a complicated thing when it comes to a character like Ayasegawa. He is not a competitive person, but if he's in competitive sports and he wants to play sports, is it's hard to separate those two things and to like want him to almost like cater to his belief that he shouldn't be at his best or even just at his default, at his normal, for his case. One thing that I really love about the series is how you see this different perspective of how the children react. I mean, obviously, you got Isagawa himself, how he feels about being this prodigy who is so much better at the sports than everyone else and the consequences of that. But you see the other children and you see the adults in his life around him. You see a variety of different iterations of how that comes about in coaches who want to exploit that, who want to like disregard his feelings altogether for their own benefit, of how they see the potential of him, versus you've got those who are perhaps they see the potential but they know that they have to nurture it to get the best out of him. And like as you said, these are children. These are like what 10, 11, 12 year olds. And this is it's a tricky thing to have that power over someone that has so much power within the game that they're playing. Once you have that sort of element in the series, that's what makes it so fascinating, I feel. And I don't know if I've come to the conclusion of what the answer to that should be. I think there are times where I don't want to get too specific at this point, but there are times where I'm like, okay, I get Isagawa's point of view, but I almost want him to get over it. But that might almost feel like a betrayal of what the series putting across so strongly. Yeah, it's a big point of the series, and I don't know if it's going to be an easy answer anytime soon.
Well, no, I don't think it will. And okay, so officially, let's click on the spoiler switch here, and start talking about the specifics of the series. So, in regards to Jiro Ayasegawa, the hero, he one of the interesting things about him is he lives in a house full of women. He has a mom and three older sisters, and his dad is there. There's he's still in the family, but we never see him really. He's always away on business or whatever. And that's pretty common in Japan. From it manga overstates it, but it is a much more common thing in Japan than it is, for example, in the United States. So I think in very subtle ways, one of the things the mangaka does is to show how Jiro's perspective is influenced by his family environment, and everyone. Not only that he's the only guy in the house, but also they're all older than him too. And his mom is a very she's a very strong person, but she wants him to find something that makes him happy, but at the same time, she recognizes that he is special, that he has this ability in anything he does, which is almost preternatural. So one of the things that happens in the series is he ends up getting more or less drafted onto the Japanese national team. That's how dominant he is, without even really knowing that much about baseball. As a pitcher, he's so dominant, he gets pulled into tryouts for the Japanese under 12 national team, and he winds up on the team. And the team ends up going to Taiwan for the under 12 World Championships. And one of the things that happens is that he gets into a fight with another boy, the catcher, whose best friend, the catcher's name is Hina, and his best friend is the other pitcher, Madoka, who was the ace of the team before Jiro shows up. And he gets extremely angry at Ayasegawa for not feeling that he owes the uniform he's wearing his full measure of competitiveness, and ends up they get into a fight and it gets really ugly. So I want to ask you, because I know you said there's an element of wanting Ayasegawa to get over it, which I totally understand. How much of that is on Jiro for not respecting the competitive nature of the situation and of his teammates, and how much of the blame goes on Hina? And do you think Hina gets off too easy with his punishment for basically punching Jiro and giving him a big black eye and such? So those are my two questions. How do you apportion the blame for that confrontation? And do you think Hina, who got off relatively easily, do you think he got off too easily given the circumstances that took place?
For the first question, I think so much of, like, I don't want to see it's not a complaint. It's a feeling that the series is, I think, eliciting from me intentionally, where Isagawa, he's doing a lot of projecting what he thinks everyone feels. And yeah, he's doing that because that's his experience with so many amateurs that he's been around in all the various sports in the beginning that we see. He excels at, and he makes their life difficult. He makes life difficult for them, for their parents, for everyone. And he saw that, and that has like lingered with him. He's carrying that now into these competitive fields. He's now in a team of effectively strangers, and they want to win, and they tell him they want to win, and they want him to do his best, and he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe that that's what they want, and he doesn't believe that that's what he wants to do either. Plus, you have this whole other aspect, which I think is fascinating, is and I don't think I've ever seen it in a sports series where the main character doesn't want the opposite team to lose. Like
Yes.
he doesn't want them to not have a good time. His interest is never in we have to win. It's how do I make them lose as best as possible for them? And I mean, yeah, I love whenever we go in that headspace for
Yeah,
him.
at one point he actually says he wants to give the other team, he wants to let the other team have a hit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sometimes it feels like as he's in the game and as he's like getting further into it, that maybe he is realizing that it is possible for him to give it his all. But I also can't blame, from like a character point of view, why he still holds on to those feelings, and why he's almost like predetermined his life after this point, um, that he can't take this seriously, that he doesn't want to be professional, that like those are things that from a narrative point of view are really interesting, though as an audience he's also balancing the aspect of I would love to see that, like I want to see that in the story, and it's clearly going to be a hurdle he has to get over. Whether it's sooner or later, we're going to find out. For the question on like Hina and the backlash of that whole conflict, the decisions of the adults in this are also quite curious, and I feel maybe in that case, it might just be down to what they think is better for the team, and they're kind of absolving individual blame to that level. I mean, yeah, I it's fascinating. I don't know if it's what it was correct or incorrect in what was done there with that particular confrontation, but from a narrative point of view, I really liked everything that came from it.
Yeah, I did too. I feel like um, I understood why Hino was upset, but when you get to that level where you're like punching out a teammate, I feel like I feel like the coaches, as you said, I think we're making a decision based on the needs of the team rather than what was right in the moment. Um, which I think is a sort of a subtle commentary on how things like that can politically, motivate decisions where the lives of kids are on the line. And I don't think that these coaches are presented as bad men by any means, but I think they do make a mistake here. The other thing that was kind of interesting, I mean, as you say, the thing with Ayasegawa is he genuinely feels bad for the people he's beating. It's not just a question of being better than his teammates. He genuinely feels like regret that his opponents might not be having a good time because he's dominating them because nobody can get a hit off him, and that's incompatible with highly competitive baseball. Which even at the under 12 level, when we're talking about a tournament like that, a world championship, his attitude is incompatible with that environment. It doesn't work. And so, and in the end, the kids who know about that comment he makes during the game about when he asks his Kina, the catcher, should we let those guys get a hit so they won't feel too bad? He doesn't tell the coaches about that. He kind of, despite their confrontation and despite their the problems they have, he lets that go, which I think is very interesting. Um, Now, so before we get to like the future of the series and where we think it is going to go, and one other incident I wanted you to comment on is at the close of the Taiwan situation, the Taiwan arc, if you will, when the kids are getting ready to head back to America or to head back to Japan, excuse me, a big question: what's going to happen with Jiro's development next? Where is he going to go? What is he going to do? Is he going to go back to the Bambies, this ridiculous team that it's just a bunch of kids having fun where he can't even pitch because no one can catch? There's a strong team that wants him, but he doesn't really want to play for them. And the question I want to ask you specifically is Coach Namiki, who is the head coach of the under 12 team. He runs a baseball academy, and he Ayasegawa has kind of looked at him as sort of come to respect him as kind of a father figure. And, he's a kid living with a bunch of women that he loves, but he clearly lacks adult male role models in his life. So he really, I think, latches on to the coach. and he asks if he can come and study at his academy. And we get this great scene where we get inside the mindset of the coach who thinks, yeah, boy, I would be a perfect coach for him because I'm going to mentor him. I'm going to take it slowly with him. If he comes to the academy and he doesn't even join a team, he doesn't even have to play in competitive games. He can just work on developing himself as an athlete, as a pitcher, without hurting himself as he gets older. But in the end, he decides he's not going to take Jiro at his academy because his middle school age son has told him he wants to go to his academy, and it's implied that the coach and his son have had kind of a rocky relationship, and he doesn't want Jiro to come to the academy because he's so much better than his own kid, and he doesn't want to see his kid go through what other kids have gone through, seeing how much better he is than them, especially given that his own son is a couple years older. What is your reaction to that moment and Namiki's decision not to take Jiro at his academy for those reasons? I'm very curious to hear your take on that because I think it's one of the most interesting sections of the manga.
Totally agree. Is That's one of the most intriguing conversations of the many that are in that portion of the Taiwan tournament of that Taiwan arc. Looking over it, I feel like it does go to show how principled the coach is in his decision. You could look at it from the perspective of, do you want to like encourage that sort of nepotism, the like prioritizing of his child? But as you say, we do understand that they don't have maybe the best relationship, and maybe he isn't the most gifted at baseball, but the coach wants to put that effort in with his kid. At the same time, he also recognizes that Aisegawa has so much potential, and to be like the one encouraging and coaching and looking after him, um, like the so much that could come for him himself as a coach from that opportunity. Like you have the coach in the very beginning of the series who goes against Aisegawa's wishes to go for the tryouts, and I think he does that in part because it goes back and it reflects on him. He was the coach who found him. He was the coach who got him to that point. And the Namiki, the coach that we see there, he so could have easily prioritized that, and he doesn't. And even if there are like you could argue the reasons for why he did it. I think it is really principled of him to stick with what he feels is fair, um, to himself, to his family, to what he can prioritize. Clearly, he doesn't think that he can prioritize his own son and this other boy who is 10, 20 times better at baseball than his son. And if he can't put the effort into both of them, he made the decision to only do one. And yeah, I think I respected that decision, even though going into it, that was the decision I wanted. That was the direction I wanted the series to go.
Me too.
Again, I can't be mad. I can't be mad at it because it was like this. It doesn't feel like the plot is dictating the characters again. When you have the characters making decisions that feel authentic and true to what their point of view is, you just have to accept it. And yeah, that's why it is so interesting. Although I have on the back of that as well, I have another question.
Sure.
This is only covering under 12s, as you say, and after that point we get into another arc, and there is a little bit of a time skip, but really it's nothing marginal. um Casting your like mind forward, or like predicting how long do you think the series like A is going to run, and how much of Isagawa's life or career do you think we're going to focus on? Like personally, like I can see so many ways that this could turn out. I could see this being like, I don't know, 200, 300 chapters and he's only a kid.
Yeah.
Or I wouldn't be surprised if it gets to a point and there's a big pivotal moment, and then there's a jump, and then maybe there's a contrast in child versus adult in that perspective, as well. And I feel like that's where I would love the series to go. But yeah, I'm curious what you think of that.
Well, in reading it to this point, I feel like I don't see why you would take a series in this direction unless you plan to be in it for the long haul. Because I feels like everything we're reading up to this point is really setting something up. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know why you would take the series in this direction unless you unless you put planned, if it were successful enough, which now it clearly is, unless it were successful enough, unless it unless you were going to take it for the long run. I think you have to see him develop, or else you really not paying off all the development that you're putting all this hard work into now. What that looks like is a tougher question. I wouldn't be surprised to see a time skip because he's so detailed. The author is so detailed. I actually don't even know for sure if the author is a man or a woman. I think it's a man, but I don't know for sure. Um, if you were to go on this level of detail, I think, like you say, you could go 200 chapters and we could still be in Little League. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think at some point there will be a jump, probably to middle school, and we'll see him there. And I think an interesting question then that will arise at that point is, if Ayasegawa does change and become a more competitive person and embrace his gift, as it were, is that something we as readers should be celebrating? Because he's really a sweet kid. I mean, he's really a such a nice kind boy, and all of the things he feels, we can look at them with the benefit of distance and the benefit of experience and say, these are mistakes, but they're all born out of kindness. And his flaw is that he's too kind. He has too much empathy. And Lord knows the world is going to beat that out of him anyway with time. So is that something we should look at and say that's a good thing? And I think that's another one of the interesting questions. That's another one of the interesting questions that the series is asking and will ask even more. What do you want to see? What you want to see? Would you want to see a time skip? It sounds like you want to see. But what else do you want to see the series do? Is, let's assume it runs for 200 chapters. What do you want to see from it?
Okay, well, I think yes, I do want a time skip, and if it is going to be a time skip, I would love if it was an even longer series. And as you say, this goes into the macro details of like almost every event, every turn that we see the characters go through. So it's taking its time, and if it's going to jump forward, I would love if we see a shift in perspective on how Isagawa views the game. This is the series could take a completely different direction, and if we ever pick this back up and talk about it down the line, maybe it'll seem silly predicting this now. What I would, what I think the series at some point needs, not maybe in the short term, but let's say medium term, is I think Isagawa needs to find basically a rival. He needs to find as close to someone who can rival him as the perfect pitcher and match his skills, and maybe not necessarily defeat him, but almost give him that taste of like, oh, this is what it could feel like to enjoy being competitive. Like this is what everyone else feels like when they're playing against people at or around their level. And I think once the series introduces someone like that, I think you're unlocking a whole other potential for his character to then maybe change his perspective, and whether that is viewed as like a negative or a positive will be interesting. I almost think if you have that and then have a time skip, and he's a professional player, let's say, and the story picks up then from there. I would be really interested if you see Isagawa with a complete shift in personality, maybe someone who is so driven to be competitive that like it's like ruined him and like changed who he is as a person. Like the contrast, having that contrast would be, I think, fascinating to see, and it would allow for this author, who I actually at this point I fully trust decisions that are going to be made, at least on a character level. I would fully trust if, even if we do go down that route of him accepting his love for competition, that that could be studied and picked apart at a character level and compare that with how he got to that point. But again, who knows where the series could go? It might also just go until he's like, I don't know, 14 or 15, and then he decides never to play again. Um, there's there's so many ways it could go, but because I'm so interested already at this point, I think that goes to show the quality of the series.
Yeah, I think another direction it could go is whether it's possible for him to remain the person he is fundamentally and still be a success in this sport. Can he go on to become a great pitcher without embracing competitiveness, hardcore? He has to change some. I don't think there's any question about that. But I think we've seen a lot of sports series like Major about really gifted kids who become gifted at their sport, and how it is to be a gifted person trying to get ahead in the sport. Captain Tsubasa is like that, and I think we've seen a lot of series like Major Second about the big underdog who's undersized and has to scrap for everything. What I think we've very very rarely seen, and never this well, is the kid who is literally anti-competitive, who has no interest in defeating anybody if it's going to make them feel bad, and yet is great at what they do. I think it's a fascinating contrast. And so I know we're going long here, but I want to talk briefly. So let you weigh in on this briefly, if you would. How do you feel about the direction of the series since it's gotten back from Taiwan, and where it's going? Where it's going now? How do you feel it compares with what we had with the tournament arc and things like that? Now that we've got Ayasegawa in his home life and having arguments with his mother about how he clips his toenails and stuff like that, which is such a typical elementary school boy thing. How do you feel about where the current arc is as compared to where it was before?
As we were talking about, the coach's decision on whether to take Isagawa to his academy or not, and whether that's what we wanted, which is what we thought we wanted. Um, I think the story has taken a different approach, and frankly, I think it's a little bit less interesting. I'm hoping that it's planting seeds for something bigger to come. Um, but yeah, there's basically this crossroads at that point after this tournament where does he go out to Bambi's? Does he go to this popular team and this good team who wants him, but he doesn't really want to go to? Or then you have this academy approach. Um, yeah, I think it's been like over a dozen, maybe like 20 chapters of this current arc. I will say it has reading this weekly is I don't want to say it
Mm.
diminished my opinion of the series overall, but it's the least compelling element of the series so far, and I think that might reflect in the score that I give it in the end. But yeah, hopefully there is a lot more to come, so a lot more could develop.
Okay. I think I kind of agree with your sense that this is building towards something. I don't get any sense of randomness in the narrative here. I think everything happens, it leads into something else. And I think what we're seeing is laying the groundwork for something bigger to come. So I like the slice of life elements of it too. So I don't have a problem with it. I think the big question of how long Ayasegawa can be this anti-competitive and still be the protagonist of this series, I think that's a fascinating question going forward. Okay, before we get into our overall views, and our scores, let's talk about recommendations. And I am going to recommend a manga because that's what we do here is recommending manga. However, before I do that, I want to say that overall, and I thought long and hard about a recommendation for this series. Um, I have to recommend because it's by far the most on point recommendation I can give. It's not a manga, it's actually a book and a movie. The book is called Searching for Bobby Fischer, by Fred Waitzkin, and it's a story about his son, who was a great. His name is Josh Waitzkin, and this is based on a true story. Josh Waitzkin became the youngest U.S. grandmaster at chess, and he is a fantastic we've all seen these, child prodigies, child chess prodigies. He is a legit child chess prodigy. And he became the youngest U.S. champion, actually, too. Josh Waitzkin did. But Josh Waitzkin was a super sweet, kind little boy who hated beating people because he didn't like to make them sad. And the overlap with Days of Diamond is pretty stark, actually. I've both read the book and watched the movie. The movie came. This is an older movie. It's probably like 30 years old now, but it's an excellent book. It's an excellent film. Ben Kingsley is in the film. He plays the boy's teacher. And basically, the story, it's really the father writing about his son and writing about the same dilemma we see in Days of Diamond. This idea of maintaining this kindness and at the same time carrying the weight of a talent so great that the world expects you to, the world expects you to exploit the talent. It expects the adults around him to exploit it, and they expect the son to exploit it. So that's really, I think, the most on point recommendation I can give you is searching for Bobby Fischer. But in a manga recommendation, I'm going to have to go back again to Blue Period by Yamaguchi Tsubasa. And I guess it's something shows my esteem for Blue Period because it comes up in numerous discussions in this recommendation section. But I do think Blue Period is also a good recommendation for Days of Diamond because even though it's not a sports series, it deals with some of the same issues of what it's like to be a genius, and to deal with the weight of that. And this is especially not so much the main character of Blue Period, but one of his colleagues who winds up becoming a friend. He's very hostile to him at the beginning, but winds up becoming a friend of his. I see some similarities there between that boy as an older version of Jiro from Days of Diamond. And it also is a series that looks in a very interesting way at the role of teachers in children's lives. So on a manga recommendation, I got to go again, Blue Period, Yamaguchi Tsubasa. How about your recommendation, Samu?
It's so interesting that Blue Period is twice now. It's been like your secondary recommendation for something. Yeah, that's quite interesting. For me, I'm going to go with Big Windup or Ookiku Furikabutte by Asa Higuchi. This is another baseball series, and I think the reason why this one always sticks out in my head is I feel like from a perspective of the art, it's always seemed like a comparison I was making in my head. Quite similar art styles and character designs. I think in Big Wind Up, I think the characters even look younger than they even are in the story. Um, so from that purely stylistic point of view, I think the series is quite similar, and as well as the pace and the like commitment to showing every detail, potentially to like a painful level, considering that
Yes.
Big
Yeah.
Wind Up is a very
Yes. Yes. Yes.
it has a very slow publishing schedule, and even when it was adapted into anime, I think uh, that pace was still felt. But I mean, that's also the appeal of it, and similar to the appeal of the Days of Diamonds. These boys don't have superpowers. It's pretty realistic depiction of just young boys playing baseball. I think the difference between them is Big Windup there's no people that are essentially prodigies. It's almost the focus is quite different, and it feels just like kids playing baseball, and like it turns out they're quite good actually, and they're kind of surviving and like going along against these other teams. Um, so yeah, it's a bit different in that sense, but I think there's a lot. I think it has a similar energy to it that Days of Diamond does.
Yeah, I like that recommendation a lot. I think I agree with you. I think there is some overlap there. It is a series that is exhaustively detailed, and also a series where the feelings of the opponent are very much a factor in the thinking of the main characters and in the narrative. It's a series that really respects both sides, and I also totally irrespective of the main point of this discussion. I think people overlook Ofuri as an important trailblazer in a new style of sports anime that we hadn't seen before. And I think it really blazed a trail for series like Haikyuu. I really believe that. I think Ofuri was a definite trailblazer for series like Haikyuu that came along later, and certainly are not derivative of it, but kind of surfed a wave that it started in a sense. So I like to see it get a shout out. I like to see it get some credit. Okay, so let's wrap up here. Overall view of the series, final thoughts on the series, and your score. So, Samu, why don't you go first?
For me, I'm going to give it at the moment an 82. I feel like maybe I would have given it more like an 85 or an 86 if I was just coming off the back of the under 12s tournament in Taiwan. The series is not lost me by any means, but I'm waiting right now. I'm waiting for something to come back and grip me. So that's why it's dipped ever so slightly.
Okay, very good. I'm going to give it a 92, which is a damn high score, because it's the most interesting new sports manga I've read in quite some time, for sure. I don't want to say since yada yada yada, since baby steps, since whatever, but I think it's the fact that we've been talking about it now for so long, and we could easily go on much longer. And it's a series that only has about 50 chapters, and it's about 11-year-olds playing baseball. I think that's a testament to how intellectually dense, how interesting it is. It asks some really fascinating questions, and it really has a sensitivity and a perspective to it that I don't think we see very often in sports manga. And as someone who loves sports manga very dearly, I think this one is really special. So if you just like interesting stories about people, especially kids, of course read it. But especially if you're a fan of sports manga, uh, especially seinen sports manga, I would say by all means, it's available in English now. Read Days of Diamond. I think it's going to be with us for a while. I think it's going to be very successful. It already is very successful. I think you're going to see an anime for it within a year or two. So it's a good series to kind of get in on the ground floor and say, hey, I was into Days of Diamond before it was cool. Okay, that wraps it up for another episode of My Taste is Better Than Yours, and a case where I think our tastes were pretty close on this one. I think we both really like this series. I want to thank everyone for listening. Samu, thank you very much. It was great to talk to you again.
Likewise, and to echo what you say, I hope everyone who's listening can get on board, give it a go, and if you really enjoy it, you can be like us and say, "I was there as early as possible before it became an even bigger thing than it already is," which I think it might just be.
There you go. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. And as always, like, comment, subscribe. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.